It's time to review. Well, not review. This is the prediction. This is the prediction video, so not the review video. Predictions for UFC 277. This is the Pena versus Nunes rematch card. There's going to be some interesting stats about rematches with newly minted champions, like the immediate rematches. That does kind of favor Pena, and we'll get into that. But at the same time, there's a lot working against Pena, I think. But it's an interesting fight, and there's also a rematch between Brandon Moreno, Kai Kara France. That's for the interim flyweight title. That's really interesting. And I'm also really, really looking forward to Alex Pantoja versus Alex Perez, even if I've not been the biggest believer in Alex Perez, realistically speaking. And Magomed Ankalaev versus Anthony Smith is a good fight as well. Honestly, the main card of this pay-per-view, even if the main event is a little bit odd, is really, really good, but the undercard leaves a fair bit to be desired. And I understand this card lost 6 fights, which have been rebooked and reconfigured in certain ways, or just straight up are off the card in the case of Paulo Costa and Luke Rockhold, as well as Ignacio Bahamondes and Ludwig Klein. But I think even with the original card intact, okay, maybe Costa Rockhold, I assume, would have been on the main card, and then you drop something like I don't even know what you dropped from the main card, because honestly, it feels like all of these fights should be on the main card, except for kind of like Derek Lewis versus Sergey Pavlovich. I know people love Derek Lewis, and the UFC loves their heavyweight fights, and by the standards of a heavyweight fight, it's actually not a bad fight, but it's the only one that doesn't have like immediate title ramifications, because the winner of Pantoja Perez probably doesn't get a title shot because you got Davidson Figueiredo coming back, but pretty much positions themselves as like the third or fourth guy in the division. Ankalaev and Smith has been marketed as a title eliminator. Then you've got the 2 title fights. And yeah, there's not really any room. I guess you could do a 6-fight main card with Rockhold and Costa joining it. Or do you do Rockhold versus Costa as like the featured prelim? I don't know. Interesting thoughts on card construction here. We're going to start with my what seems to be like my tradition of the podcast, is talking about some kind of like random claim that a fighter makes, or theory that the fandom has that just doesn't seem to like fit, like the oddities of MMA perception. And that is TJ Dillashaw recently giving an interview where he described Aljamain Sterling as an athlete, not a fighter. Now, whatever the difference between an athlete and a fighter is, I think is going to vary person to person, whatever. But like in Dillashaw's case, his thought was that Aljamain Sterling is not a dangerous fighter, not a dangerous finisher, which is weird because Sterling has more finishes than Dillashaw. Now, I will freely say this. Dillashaw has the higher profile finishes. Obviously, the 2 finishes against Renan Barao and also Cody Garbrandt are huge. But I think in both cases, there's certain asterisks next to them. Like in Barao's case, he kind of fell off a cliff after that. And the question is, was being beaten by Dillashaw, did that cause the fall? Or was Barao matched up with Dillashaw at the time where he was ready to fall off that cliff? And it's an interesting thought because Barao, via the Nova União camp, and we know this is fairly well documented, the Nova União camp, one, trains notably hard to the point where their fighters usually do not have the longest careers in terms of looking physically prime, and 2, have historically not really done a great job with weight cutting and have shortened their fighters' careers that way. Because if you think about it, Jose Aldo came from that camp, of course, and for the longest time, we were hearing about Jose Aldo had to go up to 155 because the cut to 145 was so hard. And then he ends up being a champion contender at bantamweight, which is 135 pounds. Right when he entrusts his nutrition and his weight cut into a more proven scientific team. So it's things to keep in mind. And then with Garbrandt, number one, we've seen Garbrandt knocked out a number of times since. And I know the argument will be, Well, Dillashaw was the first one to do it. Just because you're the first one to do something does not mean that the gaps and the holes were not already there. And given that Garbrandt's striking style was very much molded by TJ's coach, Bane Ludwig, when he was with Team Alpha Male, and Dillashaw was a primary training partner of Garbrandt, it's not hard at all for me to think of the fact that, like, Dillashaw just knew what the world now knows. And then, of course, you have the fact that Dillashaw did go the difference with YL Watson, a guy who's been finished 12 times. And in terms of, like, joint opponents, there are 4. And at the end of the day, Aljamain finished Cody Sandhagen, which TJ did not do. And that's the thing, is that a lot of people will be like, okay, well, that was him coming back. That's the ring rust. There is every chance in the world that TJ Dillashaw, the Dillashaw that finished Barao and Garbrandt, doesn't honestly overly exist anymore. I mean, the guy is coming off an EPO suspension. He is, despite the fact that he is very baby-faced, he is actually on the older end of bantamweight. I should have had his fighter page up, and I'd have his age here. He's 36. He is slightly older than I am. He's actually literally about 1 year older than me, because his birthday is February 7th, 86. I'm February 6th, 87. So actually, we're very, very close together. But anyways, he is starting to get to that age of fading. He did have a lot of time off, lost a lot of his prime because of the EPO suspension, and did not look particularly amazing in Sandhagen, who was steamrolled by Aljamain Sterling. They both finished Hugo Viana. That's one of the other, like, points on the for comparison. And then basically it's TJ finished Barao. Aljamain did not. So it's kind of like both of them have a common opponent that they finished that the other one didn't. Both of them have a common opponent that they both finished. And then, of course, there's Rafael Assunção, who had 3 fights against the 2 of them combined and never got finished. So the difference, like, they're very much in the same league, I think, in terms of, like, lethality and, like, fighter versus athlete based on the criteria put forth in the interview. It's been kind of interesting to see fans debate it. I don't think, like, it's not. It's one of those things. It's like, whatever, you say what you need to get hyped up for the fight. Don't get me wrong. Like, if this is how TJ is going to get into the zone to give Aljamain Sterling a hard fight and possibly take the belt, cool. Fighters say stupid stuff all the time. That's not new. But it's interesting to see the fan reaction to that whole statement. And I don't know. There's not much else to say. But let's get on to the fight card here. So opening up, we have Juliana Pena versus Amanda Nunes, number 2. I am surprised at how close the line is here. Nunes is minus 275. Pena's plus 230. I kind of honestly still expected it to be wider, just because the win by Pena the first time was so utterly shocking. And I don't think anyone's really figured out really how it came to be. Someone did put up on Twitter, and Connor Burks put this up. And also it's the Dwyer score, who posted an article back in 2018 about immediate rematches between newly crowned champions and the person they just beat. And they have a massive favoritism for the newly crowned champion. They have Tim Sylvia versus Andrei Arlovsky winning, Frankie Edgar beating BJ Penn, Benson Henderson beating Frankie Edgar, Chris Weidman beating Anderson Silva, Max Holloway beating Jose Aldo, Volkanovski beating Max Holloway, Thug Rose beating Joanna Jędrzejczyk, TJ Dillashaw beating Cody Garbrandt. Hey, tie-in. Stipe Miocic beating Daniel Cormier, and Thug Rose beating Weili Zhang. And then on the failure side of things, they have Randy Couture beating Vitor Belfort in the third fight of their thing, and Davidson Figueiredo beating Brandon Moreno. There are similarities in, like, almost all these circumstances to the fight. Obviously, number one, you have a newly crowned champion who did win. And there are certain things, like the Weidman Silva fight kind of feels sort of similar-ish. Similar time of a finish and almost style of it, where one fighter, in the case of Silva, starts to showboat. In the case of Nunes, just fades really badly. And then obviously Thug Rose versus Joanna Jędrzejczyk is a bit of another example where a lot of people were like, okay, it was kind of a fluke the first time that Thug Rose did that, and it's not going to happen to Joanna again. That's probably the most similar. But here's the thing. I've rewatched the fight like 5 times between these two, and I still come away with generally believing Amanda Nunes' claim that she just had a really bad preparation camp for the fight. That while there were things that Pena was doing, Pena, for example, showed an ability to roll a jab, ability to do some parrying, ability to set up some counters, which are actually fairly rare in Nunes' career. And she was busier than most of Nunes' opponents. When Nunes was on top of her, she was forcing her to scramble a little bit, use up energy in a way that, say, Germaine de Randamie did not. Germaine de Randamie was active and aggressive from guard with like triangle chokes, bizarrely enough, but was not forcing the same kind of movement, the same kind of energy expenditures that Pena was doing. Like, I don't want to sell Pena short. She fought in ways to make Nunes gas, and then Nunes did gas, and she finished her. But it just has to feel like something was up with Nunes' camp for that, because it was the second round. Like, that's the problem. It was the second round, and Nunes has fought the distance with Felicia Spencer, with Germaine de Randamie, with Raquel Pennington, with Valentina Shevchenko twice, with that's about it, actually. and yes, she's had fades before. She faded against Kat Zingano in the third round of their 2014 fight, and she faded against Sarah D'Alelio in Invicta in 2013. But those all came much, much later. And I guess the question you could pose is like, okay, but is that a sign of a bad weight camp, or is this a sign that Amanda Nunes, post becoming a mother, maybe isn't at that same hunger, that same training level? I have to think that she is, though. I kind of have to think that she is. And after watching the fights several times over and trying to find, okay, what is Pena going to be able to do here, I tend to think that Nunes' power, Nunes' wrestling, Nunes' strength, all the things that I thought Nunes would have in the first fight are still there. Are still there. And it's fascinating. It's one of those fights where Pena won. You cannot take that away from her. But watching the fight every time, it just feels more like Nunes shuts down and loses the fight. That she just self-destructs in there. In a way that I would really, really hope doesn't happen again. But at the same time, there are also massive concerns. I believe this is her first non-ATT fight camp. She set up her own private, not necessarily gym, because I think it's a death clutch situation. Brock Lesnar's old school thing with like where the camp was literally rotating around him, as opposed to any concept of like preparing a stable of fighters. Now, mind you, I assume Nina Nunes would be being prepped by the same people. But aside from that, it's really the Amanda show. So I have to pick her again. Even though that gas tank does have me worried. There's a lot of X factors at play that I am exceptionally nervous about. And despite Juliana Pena's insistence, it is not the size of their ovaries. that, that has me pondering. That has me worried. That has me taking second thoughts about this fight. It's just, it still feels like if Nunes is at her best and Pena is at her best, Nunes wins. How far from that 100%, that best, that peak, that pinnacle can Nunes get before she loses? I don't want to say I have to see it because we've seen it. We have actually seen it. But this is one of those rare times where I think I honestly have to see it again before I'm convinced that Pena has long-term belt-holding aspirations. And I was actually a pretty big booster of Pena for a while. I think she has, for bantamweight, she has a rare physicality, not necessarily on a strength level, because there are a lot of strong fighters, but like her speed, her activity work rate, her power, and her strength all make her a very unique punishing fighter. It's just at the same time, I also think her coaching situation, because it involves Rick Little, is terrible. I've said this before. I think Rick Little is amongst the elite coaches of MMA, at least in terms of resume, has just fallen ass backwards into the fact that he had Pena and he had Chiesa to build his reputation, his resume over. And I think it shows in the sense that almost everything Pena does, and she's now with Valley Force, um, Mike Valley's gym, but Little is still involved. Everything feels incredibly rough and jagged and not the most thought through of games. And I think it also kind of shows that whenever in the lead up to this fight, they have literally just kind of resorted to, I have a bigger heart, I have bigger ovaries to pump up how Pena is going to win this fight. And don't get me wrong, the heart, the fighting spirit of a fighter is huge. And I have all kinds of questions about Amanda Nunez's. But the fact that there's really no talk about like where the technical things actually lie is concerning. It's kind of weird. Like we've seen Pena win this fight, and I don't see the technical aspects of the fight any differently than I did the first time they fought. I don't. And admittedly, it's been 7 months. I mean, we're not talking about a fight that's been years in the making or anything. So I mean, that's part of the problem. But I think, yeah, part of my brain is paranoid that Nunes is going to lose this, but like the rational one that breaks down the technical aspects of the fight, just it can't see it. It really can't. So yeah, Nunes. And I'm hoping Nunes wants to come out and make a statement. Like that loss was embarrassing. And one would hope that she wants to do this. Brandon Moreno versus Kai Kara France. This is actually a lot more exciting. These two fought each other, of course, 2.5 years ago. So things have changed. That's enough time for fighters to have developed, and I think we have seen that. I think we've seen for Moreno. I think we've seen not a different style. I think the Moreno that beat Kai Kara France is functionally the Moreno of now, but better. Just like a little sharper in every regard. His counters are a little bit better. His defensive striking is better. His footwork is better. He's again, he went there with Davidson Figueiredo, a physical force, a powerful, fast fighter, and was able to outwork him and beat him, as well as lose to him, of course, and draw with him. but to go out there and work his game and short circuit the power advantage that Moreno does, or that Figueiredo does have, and show off a very nuanced striking game, even if it's not necessarily the slickest game. It's very much going out there and imposing pace and toughness and quickness on an opponent. And Kai Car-France wasn't blown out of the water by that the first time, but he was beaten. And similar to Moreno, he hasn't fundamentally changed who he is as a fighter, even if he has also become better. He's had some new wrinkles. He's had a little bit better, little sharper technique again, a little bit better at keeping the range, a little bit better at finding counter windows, which that last one is the concern because Moreno is there to be countered. Moreno is open to be chin checked by a good counter punch. And Kai Car-France does hit really hard for a flyweight. But how much do you bet on a puncher's chance at flyweight? It's kind of low. And it doesn't feel like either of these guys have added a new dynamic to the fight from their first one. And that really it's two guys who have gotten better, but have gotten better at similar rates and in similar ways. And I'm taking Moreno to win the second fight here via decision. I also think that the longer fight does actually help Moreno because Moreno is a guy who makes his cardio a weapon. I think having 2 extra rounds just means that those are rounds for Moreno to win. So that leaves me with Kai Car-France having to sweep 3 rounds from him at the beginning or finish him. And I don't think either happens. But I'm looking forward to a fantastic fight. I mean, their first fight was great. And I don't expect this to be at all boring or such or whatever. I don't think Moreno can be made boring. His style is aggressive and takes the fight to you. And I'm just thinking he'll get it done and become the interim champion. Now, X Factor. He does seem to be talking still a lot about Deiveson Figueiredo, which makes sense. Deiveson is the champion. Moreno obviously wants another fight with him. Wants the quadrilogy fight. One of the few times a quadrilogy fight actually makes sense. So, is that a distraction? I'm assuming not, but we'll find out. What is the reach difference in this fight again? 3.5 inches. Favorite Moreno. Okay. I think that's the other big thing. Like, I feel like if Kai Car-France had the reach advantage, I would feel a lot better about his chances. And I think the line here is pretty accurate. Minus 200 for Moreno. He is the favorite. Plus 170 for Kai Car-France. Respects the power. Respects the technique. Respects the fact that he is a very dangerous fighter and a tremendously capable one. But I do think that this matchup favors Moreno. Further on down, we got Derek Lewis versus Sergey Pavlovich. Pavlovich is the favorite, minus 115 to minus 105. Like it's a pick'em fight, and it should be because, in a nutshell, this comes down to a lot like what a lot of Derek Lewis fights come down to. Pavlovich is the longer fighter. He's fast. He's got good striking technique. He's got actually pretty good footwork. He's pretty imposing in the clinch or in the wrestling game if he needs to be. He has all the tools that have led to victories over Derek Lewis before. He's also presumably got a fairly decent chin because the only time he was finished was by Alistair Overeem. Number 1, a very notably hard hitter. Number 2, did it on the ground and pound. And Derek Lewis has the nuclear option. I know Joe Rogan overuses that term, but like to me, Derek Lewis is the fighter that suits that. Derek Lewis has the king puncher's chance. Maybe something like Dan Henderson's H-bomb is like in a remotely similar league to it, but Derek Lewis will never not be dangerous. He has such a limited skill set, but my God, is he very aware of what that skill set is. He has created the perfect Derek Lewis style where like in the grappling exchanges, he will make you tired. In the stand-up exchanges, he will to a degree lull you into a false sense of security and then crush your brain. I don't know if Pavlovich is the guy to put this together and actually do it, but like, it's not like we haven't seen Derek Lewis fall to essentially the same game plan that I could foresee Pavlovich doing. Cyril Gahn did it. Junior Dos Santos did it. Mark Hunt and Tai Tuivasa did a way more aggressive and ill-advised version of what I'm talking about. But they did it. Sean Jordan back in 2015 did it. Matt Mitrione, to a certain degree, did it. But also fighters that should have been infinitely capable of doing the exact same thing. Curtis Blades and I guess to a certain extent Chris Daukaus, but I never thought Daukaus really had a chance to beat him. Alexander Volkov's a great example, or like Francis Ngannou. And he got the job done against them, and he beat Travis Brown, despite the fact that he was getting beaten up in that fight. It never feels good to pick against Derek Lewis. I don't have that level of confidence in Pavlovich. I do have some concerns about his gas tank. Not because we've seen him get tired. It's just that his finishes do tend to come early. First round finish against Shamil Abdurrahimov. First round against Maurice Green. First round against Marcelo Gome. First round against Kirill Sedelnikov. Has first round against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of his pre-UFC fights. Only went to the distance 3 times before getting to the UFC. Baga Akayev and Alexei Kudin. Those are both actually very good wins. Those are probably his best wins before the UFC. And Mikhail Magnaktin. You know, good, actually pretty good fighters. But they also all... He did fade in all of those fights, and they just didn't capitalize. Like, Lewis will capitalize on a fade, but at the same time, I could also entirely see Pavlovich finishing him in the first round. I don't know. It's a coin flip fight in more ways than just the odds say it is. I will go with Lewis by KO. I'm going to trust him to remain composed and or at least as composed as he is, and get through the fight, and or not get through the fight necessarily, but get through some hard times and catch Pavlovich when he gets a little overconfident or a little bit faded, and apply that power. But like, of the 3 fights I picked here, Pavlovich is the most live dog, in my opinion. Pantoja versus Alex Perez. Good fight. I've never been the biggest believer in Alex Perez. Like, he beat Husiar Formiga, and I'm a big Formiga booster. But at the same time, Formiga in 2020, a bit faded. And just nothing else really holds up. Like Jordan Espinoza, Mark De La Rosa, Jose Torres, Eric Shelton, Carl's John DeThomas, Kevin Gray. These are his UFC wins, and like losses to Adam Antolin, who's a good fighter, and Jared Papazian. But like, both of those guys have actually kind of, I don't know, really fallen off quite a bit. And then I'm ignoring his like Tachi Palace fights losses in like 2011, 2012. I think those are just prospect losses. I like Perez's athleticism. I like his power. I like his aggression. He's coming in at plus 135 underdog, minus 160 to Pantoja. But like, everything I like about him, I like more about Pantoja. Like, if you're going to try and exchange power for power game with Pantoja, that doesn't really seem like a way to win. It's not historically been how you do it. It's not the Joe Benavidez fight, which Perez lost. And it's not the Davidson Figueiredo fight, which he lost. But it's a hell of a lot closer to fighting Figueiredo and Benavidez on a power scale than it is to fighting Formiga and Espinoza and De La Rosa and Torres. Like, that's the problem. It's uncharted territory. And it feels like Pantoja has won fights not dissimilar to this. He did beat Manel Cop, for example. Now, granted, Cop, very different fighter. But, beat Manel Cop, beat Wilson Hayes, who actually is, I think, a much slower version of Alex Perez, but, in the same sort of ballpark. A guy who also does have wins over Brandon Royval and Brandon Moreno, of course. Just a really, really good fighter who, yes, lost to Askar Askarov. Yes, lost to Davidson Figueiredo and lost to Dustin Ortiz. By the way, how is Dustin Ortiz not with the UFC still? I understand that he was let go, kind of during the flyweight purge, but, bring that man back. That man is a solid, quality fighter that I think would be a welcome veteran addition to this super young division. But, yeah, I've got to go with Pantoja. I'm picking him to win by submission, most likely. Probably more of a club and sub than a pure submission. I think he'll hurt him. He'll finish him on the ground sort of thing because he does have a opportunistic submission game, but it's just too much power, much deeper striker. I think just a guy who's just more battle tested and put together. Something about Perez I can't buy it. Can't buy it yet. And the betting line is close. Actually, a little bit closer than I expected. But still. Heavy favorite Magomed Ankalaev, minus 500 versus plus 380 Anthony Smith. I'm picking Ankalaev. Yes, the loss to Paul Craig is embarrassing, but he really has put together kind of this relatively narrow striking game, admittedly, but a striking game that has good power, good coordination, good agility, some creativity. It's not too route. Backed up with a super powerful wrestling game, great top control, punishing ground and pound, pretty good submission game in his own right, despite the loss to Paul Craig. And Anthony Smith is a dangerous guy off his back. He's a guy who has caught some people. But I don't see it. Smith is an incredibly game opponent anywhere, but he's not elite anywhere. His striking, okay, granted, he did stop Jimmy Crute when he shut down his leg with the low kicks, but one, that still feels kind of flukish to a certain degree, and two, Jimmy Crute, his nickname The Brute is really fitting because of his personality, his fighting style, and because it rhymes with his last name. It's an incredibly fitting one, but there's not a lot of nuance there. And then, yes, he did more or less dominate Devin Clark on the feet during the striking exchanges that they did have. He did outstrike Ryan Spawn, but Ryan Spawn is himself not a bad striker. I struggle to quantify what I mean about when I talk about Ryan Spawn. It's just he's a distinctly uncomfortable striker. And Ankalaev just does seem very composed, very calm on the feet, even though I think he should probably use a wrestling game. I think he should probably use the powerful physique that he has and get to the ground and beat up Smith and drill armbar and triangle defense. Because that is a way that Smith has won, and that is the only way we've seen Ankalaev lose. But I am taking Ankalaev by decision. I do think that minus 500 line is too wide. It feels very wide. Alex Moreno versus Matt Semmelsberger. Talk about a guy who I still also don't have a lot of faith in. It's Matt Semmelsberger. There's obvious physical talent to him. He's got some excellent timing with his counters. He's got a knack for finishing. He's got good power. He's strong. But I also think that he kind of doesn't necessarily have solutions for deep striking questions. Every time he's fought somebody who brings a little nuance to the table, it's kind of flummoxed him. It's kind of you watch the fight with Chaos Williams, and Chaos Williams is not by any means a super deep technical striker, but he had him flummoxed. You watch his fight with AJ Fletcher, again, not a super deep technical fighter, but at points looked kind of lost. He obviously beat Jason Witt in 16 seconds, but other than that, it's okay, we've seen you beat Jason Witten, 16 seconds, who's a very, very straightforward power striker. And we've seen you knock out Martin Sano, who's just terrible, in 15 seconds. And then we've seen him beat Carlton Minus and AJ Fletcher, who are like the bottom of the barrel. Don't get me wrong, there are reasons to doubt Alex Morono here. I don't have a problem with him being a plus 135 underdog with a minus 160 favorite going back the other way for Semmelsberger. Because Morono is about as bad of an athlete as you can get and be a competitive UFC fighter at 170. He's not very fast. He's not very hard hitting. He's not very explosive. But his striking style is nuanced. It is deep. As I get a text message here, allow me to mute that. My apologies. Who's texting me at like 7 in the morning? Buzz off. Anyways, I just think that Morono is a guy who breaks down people really, really well. High fight IQ guy. Sort of dude that you would really want to have as a coach because he's made a lot out of very, very little actual physical talent. He's going to come out there with some combinations. He's going to come out there with pressure. He's going to come out there aware of Semmelsberger's knockout power. And granted, he did get caught by Chaos Williams and get knocked out in a fight that I was sounding very similar to this on. But I, at the end of the day, think that Williams benefited from fighting a bit anti what he had fought before. Like it seemed like he was holding something in the bag for when he got to the UFC, which is an interesting topic, or interesting strategy, I should say. And Morono kind of fell into it. But Semmelsberger, we've seen what he can do. We've seen what he doesn't really pull out, and I can't pick the puncher's chance. So Morono, who to be clear also probably has a considerable grappling edge too. He's actually a very good grappler, and we'll probably pick up a decision here. Drew Dober versus Rafael Alves. I'm kind of intrigued. What is the betting odds here? Because Dober has not looked especially great lately, even in that win against Terrence McKinney. He is still a minus 220 favorite. I'm surprised. I thought there would be a bit of a fade on him coming off of what, let's be honest, is probably 3 straight losses. I mean, great, yeah, he beat McKinney, but like he was getting stomped on by McKinney. He was on a 2-fight losing streak before then. Yes, those losses are to Islam Makhachev and Brad Riddle. Those are very good fighters, etc., etc., etc. Like don't get me wrong, because I am picking Dober. But there are opportunities here for Alves. Alves is an explosive fighter with a lot of physical ability, a lot of power. Actually, a pretty good striker. It's a bit wild at times. Like he will do stupid stuff on the feet. There's a lot of insanity to his game. There's a lot of creativity without necessarily intelligence backing it up. That's not to say he's a dumb person or anything. Just like that, a lot of what he does is like, it would be cool to do this as opposed to the opponent is doing this and this. The openings are presented here. This is the time to do something cool and awesome. And he also does have a cardio fade problem. He does have a tendency to pull guillotines. He's got 2 wins by guillotine in the UFC. One on the Dana White Contender Series and then the Mark G. Casey fight. But he is really, really willing to pull that gilly, and it will get him into trouble. Like Dober, despite not actually being a wrestler, despite being from Nebraska and kind of looking like a wrestler, has a reasonably solid top game. If you give it to him, he's hard to submit. And if Alves is willing to pull that kind of guillotine and then not really back it up with anything, because that's the thing with Alves' guillotine game, is it very much is a I finish you with the guillotine or I get pinned to the mat, because he's very stall heavy on the ground. Like there's not a lot of guard play to him. There's not a lot of sweep. There's not a lot of follow-up submissions. There's not a lot of forcing scrambles or anything. It very much is a fight-ending guillotine. I see at some point that probably being offered to him not getting it, and then ending up wasting some time. I don't really think Dober finishes him. So like I'm taking him by decision. He beat Alex Hernandez and Nasrat Hakparast, who are not Alves by any means, but like are similar level athletes, similar explosive, powerful fighters, and he handled them pretty easily. I am bizarrely interested by Dontel Mays versus Hamdi Adel Wahad. This is a late notice replacement fight, and Hamdi at 3-0 probably should not be in the UFC, but this is heavyweight, so it is what it is. Minus 170 on Dontel Mays, plus 125 on Hamdi. Hamdi's an Olympic level wrestler with a reasonable resume. It's not like one of those like every so often you'll get someone who's in the Olympics because of the vagrancies of Olympic qualifying as opposed to merit. But he is definitely, he's legit. But it feels like the wrestling is the only part of his game that I do like. Because on the feet, he's really stiff and kind of wild, which is a bad combination. And on the ground, when he goes for ground and pound, he tends to actually compromise his control a lot. It's kind of like another Olympic, Marco Madsen, a little bit. Or Arjun Bular is another example of like a high-grade wrestler who the takedowns are there and everything, but I don't think there's really necessarily a ton of follow-up. And the concern is that guys like John Madsen and Bular actually did, and Jared Rushelt actually did really well in the UFC, despite not really having much more than wrestling. So that's the big question. There's not a lot there. He's young in his career, and of course, even though he is 29, that's a baby in heavyweight terms. He's got time. He's actually an interesting pickup. But I am kind of at the point where like I have to see him beat somebody good before I pick him. Because his opponents, I believe, have a combined record of something like 7-6 before fighting him, which is a bad sign. And they're really not terribly athletic, terribly deep in every way, whereas like Mays has a lot of flaws, but is really athletic and actually is pretty good at defending against takedowns and also getting back up. His fight with Muhammad Usman is a great example where Usman had a really, really, really hard time taking him down. And when he did get him down, Mays was able to get back up. And I understand that like Muhammad Usman might be confused for a better wrestler than he actually is because he's Kamaru Usman's brother. And he actually has a football background as opposed to a wrestling background. But for heavyweight standards, Usman is really athletic and does definitely have a fairly good and reasonably deep wrestling pool. Now, Hamdi is better than that, but Hamdi also is not necessarily going to have the setups with the striking that Usman does, because Usman does have a functional power boxing game that I don't think Hamdi even has that. Mays is creative on the feet, but like that also might get him turned into trouble because he will do things like spinning hook kicks and shit. And I don't think that's a good idea. Like if Mays can stick to a basic fundamental striking game, utilize the fact that he is pretty fast on his feet, pretty decent footwork, stay at range and pick Hamdi apart, probably win this one. And I am picking him to win this by TKO. But there is a lot of potential here. And yes, he did get submitted by Rodrigo Nascimento and by Cyril Gahn, and at points was out wrestled by Alan Crowder on Dana White's Contender Series. Thing is that the Crowder fight was back in like 2017. It was like his 5th fight. It was Crowder's 11th fight. Just isn't really a fair. He was in the Hamdi position essentially. And with Nascimento, something has to be said. Nascimento's wrestling is probably far worse than Hamdi's, but Nascimento actually does have a very, very well blended game of striking to set up the takedowns. And it's again, we could see Hamdi come out here and just like show off this like really comprehensive boxing game that Hasn't happened before, but I can't bet on it. I can't bet on it. So yeah, hey, Mays by TKO. Although, quick note, Mays is really actually kind of like Alves that we just talked about. Mays does have a tendency to like throw up guillotines and like kind of pursue front headlock stuff that ends up with him being on the mat. That would be a very bad place to be. Drakkar Close versus Rafa Garcia. What are the odds on this one? Because this is the one that I actually think should be the biggest odds on the card. Minus 225 for Close and plus 185 for Garcia. I don't really see what Rafa has for him. Like I will forever have like a little bit of reservations about Drakkar Close because I remember watching the David Tamor fight that he had where Tamor used really kind of basic footwork despite being at an incredible reach disadvantage and just absolutely short-circuited Close's game, like 100%, to the point where like Close was doing what we saw last week with Chris Curtis. Like, appealing. He was even like appealing to the ref for like passivity and stuff. It was ridiculous. If you ever want to laugh at two fighters, go check that out. And it was really just about Close. Or Close. But like that's not Garcia's game. Garcia's kind of a brawler, kind of a guy who wants to kind of strike into the pocket, wants to work wrestling in, wants to do kind of all the things. And Close, I just think, is a better athlete, better clinch game, better grappler, better wrestler, and he's going to win by decision. And it's kind of weird because like you got Bubba Jenkins and now he's getting Rafa Garcia, and I feel like these are kind of like gift wrap for him. Maybe again because of the Jeremy Stevens thing where he got shoved and ended up with whiplash and everything. Yeah, I got to go Close, and I like Rafa Garcia. Like he's a super cool like action fighter, but I think he is severely limited. Like I think he is hard capped as to how far he can get. Another late notice replacement fight: Michael Morales versus Adam Fuggett. Like the last name. I don't know enough about Fuggett really to say much. I've seen a couple of his fights. Seems very, very fond of kicking. Seems to have some decent power. Seems to have actually a lot of submissions on his record, but I haven't really seen them. So I'm assuming he has like an opportunistic submission game. He does have kind of the build for it, like the long arms to wrap up chokes from awkward places. And I do have a lot of thoughts that Morales needs to develop further. If you watch him throw combinations, his form breaks down really, really badly. And like when he loads up on his right hand, his overhand, it's one really, really obvious and two sloppy as all hell. So like he's asking to get countered. But I mean, strong wrestling base, good in the clinch, good power, seems to have an innate sense of like good timing, good counters. And Fuggett is very counterable because I mean the problem with Fuggett's tendency to like literally spam kicks to the body and the head is that dude is open for like a return punch from Morales, and I think also a takedown. So I'm taking Morales by a TKO, generally a finisher, and I think Fuggett is asking for it a little bit in that regard. Fuggett feels kind of like a lot like Josh Frem. The difference is I think Josh Frem is at a super more shallow weight class where like I think at least he'll be fun. Fuggett, I think he'll just get taken apart like a lot. But this is based on relatively low footage. We'll see. Maybe he surprises me. Jiyeon Kim versus Jocelyn Edwards. Another late notice replacement fight. But this is probably actually better than the previous one because the previous one was going to be Kim versus Agapova. And I think Agapova just kills Kim. Like, am I alone on that one? Oh, by the way, Morales is minus 625 to plus 425 on Fuggett. That's a little too wide for my taste, but I do get it. This is at bantamweight? This is at bantamweight. Okay. So immediate problems, I guess, is that Edwards is actually a legitimately sized bantamweight. Kim's not. Kim's not even a particularly big flyweight. Kim is scrappy as all hell, but has no ability to lead the fight. Like, she will match your pace. And Edwards' biggest problem is that she's kind of low paced, kind of doesn't do enough. But if you're not going to punish her for that, there's no reason to assume that Kim can win. And if Edwards is going to be allowed to fight at her pace and you're not going to outpace her, she's, I think, the longer fighter. Really? Wow. Okay. Kim is got a 2 inches longer reach. That's bizarre. But I don't think she uses it nearly that well. And Edwards has much more of an active kicking game. I think Edwards will be able to fight at her range, avoid the crashing pressure that I think does shut her down. Although she did look better against Ramona Pascual recently. And just way more athleticism here. Like, way more physicality. Kim might be a little bit quicker, but like, Edwards is a reasonably quick bantamweight, and I've never been remarkably impressed with flyweight Kim's pace. So, going with Edwards to win a decision because she's just not persistent enough to get the finish, and Kim is super, super durable and tough. So, Edwards is only a minus 140 favorite here. I guess the one concern would be, is this Edwards' first cut to bantamweight? I don't think it is. She was at bantamweight for the Jessica Rose Clark fight and for the Carl Hossa fight. Okay, no, it's been mostly bantamweight. The fight with Ramona Pascual was her first featherweight fight. I guess the concern is that this is a late notice fight. She had just fought a weight class up in June, mid-June. So maybe people are hedging on the idea that maybe the weight cut will be a slight problem, but I think she'll be fine. I think she'll be fine. She seems like someone who probably stays in like really, really good shape all year round. So yeah, I've got Edwards. And Jeon Kim probably is headed to her 4th straight loss and the cutting room floor. And it, to a degree, it's disappointing because she has the potential to be a really exciting fighter. Honestly, like I enjoy watching her fight. I enjoy every fight of hers, but she's just too reactive in the sense that, like I said, she'll fight at your pace. She's capable of fighting at an incredibly high pace, but only if you demand it of her. And all of my concerns about Edwards just aren't really present here, outside of the fact that she does have a 2-inch reach advantage. Nick Negamarianu versus I think it's Ihor Portera, I believe is how you pronounce it. I could be wrong. Portera is the favorite here, really. Minus 145 to plus 125 against a guy who has been in the UFC for a hot minute, in Negamarianu, versus a guy who is debuting off the Ukrainian regional scene that recently produced Askar Mokhtarian. Or Mokhtar. I don't even remember his name. I don't even remember his name. The guy who his record changed like ridiculously before the fight, like Ukrainian Conor McGregor with the tattoos. It's weird. It is weird because not that I'm a huge booster of Negamarianu or anything, but he is 3-1 in the UFC with wins over Lexa Kamer, Ike Villanueva, and Kennedy Njoku, and lost to Saparbek Safarov in his debut. And Safarov's kind of like this weird thing where, like, dude is a super, super nasty fighter in the sense of fouls and in the sense of possibly just actually body odor and hygiene, to be honest. I don't. People have asked, like, who is the last fighter you would want to fight in the UFC, and like Saparbek Safarov is actually really high on the list. And Portera, it's a good regional record, but like, who's his best win? It's probably Lucas Sadolski on Dana White Contenders Series, who himself is completely lacking. Like, here's the thing. Like, let me read the records of Portera's opponents. leading up to his Dana White Contender Series fight. 5-2, 11-5, 0-2, 0-4, 0-3, 0-0, 17-18, 1-9, 0-0, 5-6, 0-0, 1-2, 3-2, 1-6, 5-5, 3-2, 3-2, and he lost that fight. 17-17, 0-0, 2-2, and 0-0. This is a absolutely can-crushing padded record. And say what you want about Negumereanu, he has at least beaten some guys who are in the UFC and have wins in the UFC. It's an incredibly low bar. Like, it is the bottom of the division. But I don't really see what leads to Portera being a favorite here. Picking him, I could understand, but that kind of favoritism is weird. To the technical breakdown. Nick is a super tough, persistent pressure striker who will clinch and he will take people down. He has some submission game. It's not impressive. It's very meat and potatoes. It's very defensively porous. He can be lit up. But Portara hasn't really beaten anybody and realistically doesn't present a real technical challenge for Negumereanu because he himself is a sort of power-based striker who will crash into the clinch and give Negumereanu like the exact fight that he wants, despite. And the weird thing about Negumereanu is he's only 6 feet tall, but he has like bizarrely long arms because he's packing a 78-inch reach. It's weird. He's not super broad either. Like it really is the arms. So despite the 6'3" versus 6 foot dynamic here, Portara actually has probably the lower effective range. Probably has a listed 3-inch reach disadvantage, and it probably is actually that close. Like sometimes I don't really get it because the fingertip to fingertip reach I think can be very misleading. But like in Negumereanu's case, it's pretty much all arms. So yeah. I'm taking Negumereanu by decision. Like, I don't feel amazing about it. Anytime I'm picking Negumereanu, I'm not feeling amazing about it. But like Portera has never given me a reason to actually think that he is a long-term UFC prospect. And Negumereanu has beaten people that at least have that vibe. Like Kennedy Nzechukwu is a win that's aging really, really well. Alexa Kamer felt like a really good win at the time, but Kamer's career has kind of stalled. Hasn't fought since, actually. So hopefully he comes back and we see something. Because I thought Kamer actually had legitimate promise. We finish up with probably the best names on a UFC card in a long time. Orion Koshi versus Blood Diamond. I think some people also were saying it was maybe Costco. I think it's Koshi. I am pleased to see that Orion is the favorite here. There was a lot of craziness, I thought, on Blood Diamond when he came in. Dude's a good kickboxer. Like, legitimately, he's a good kickboxer. And has the right connections and so on. But he's getting into the MMA game fairly late in life from a professional athlete standpoint. Like, he's younger than me, but fairly late for what you'd want to do. He's not particularly large for the weight class. Jeremiah Wells was able to just kind of push in on him, get the clinch, and kind of slam him down a couple times and then submit him with a really awkward position rear naked choke. Now, Jeremiah Wells is a good fighter, really physical, really good ground game, and so on. I'm not super sold on Orion Koshi just in general. He trains with Team Alpha Male, but is a welterweight. I think that's always a bad idea because I think Team Alpha Male's success is almost exclusively featherweight and below. Because I don't think their style translates up at all. But he does have the basic fundamentals of a Team Alpha Male style. He has reasonable physicality. He has some okay power by the looks of it. He has a pretty okay wrestling game. He has a high gas tank. He can fight at a high pace. And he can scramble. I don't have long-term, kind of like Negumereanu, I don't have like super long-term hopes for him, but he has the absolute bare essentials to win fights like this. Where like, yes, Blood Diamond is going to be the better striker of the two, but I think Coach is going to know that. He's going to go in. He's going to press the advantage. He's going to make it a wrestling fight. He's going to take him down. He's going to scramble with him, and he's probably going to win by submission. There you go. And the problem is Blood Diamond needed more time. Needed more time to acclimate himself, and he's not going to get the super easy fights at welterweight in the UFC. Really, they can't even really do what they did with his partner in crime, Israel Adesanya, because Adesanya at middleweight, like there were a ton of dudes who were not good wrestlers that would be forced to stand with Izzy and let Izzy develop his game and his comfort and his confidence and so on. Blood Diamond coming in off of 3 MMA fights, similar to what I think about Hamdi Abdel Wahad higher in the card, but I think that being an Olympic level wrestler versus being a high level kickboxer is still a better foundation because at least you control where the fight happens. Blood Diamond does not have that. And I'm picking Koshi. Don't have big thoughts about him in the future, but it is what it is. So the undercard is not particularly amazing, if we're being completely honest here. Like I said, I'm bizarrely fascinated by Mays versus Hamdi Abdel Wahad. Not in the sense that I think it's like, to be clear, when I say I'm bizarrely fascinated by that, I'm bizarrely fascinated to see what happens. Not that I think it's a can't miss action fight that'll burn the house down. But I'm super interested in that one. And you could say, okay, like maybe we'll find out that there is something in Portera or Blood Diamond that I'm not thinking about. Maybe Adam Fuggett is the new incarnation of Victor Henry. I think was it Victor Henry? The guy who beat my boy, who I am now also forgetting. Oh my lord. I'm terrible with the names today. My apologies. I will look it up because I feel like this fighter needs some love. I feel like he needs some. He legitimately needs to be shouted out because his debut in the UFC was great. Was it Victor Henry? Is it Victor Henry that I'm thinking of? It is. Okay, I got that. The guy who beat Honey Barcelos. There we are. He was a guy I wasn't super excited about getting a shot in the UFC. And he proved me wrong. So maybe Fuggett, maybe Portera is that. Maybe Hamdi Abdel Wahad is actually a real force at heavyweight. Maybe Blood Diamond is actually going to show us a lot and have improved and grown and done better things. Maybe Matt Semmelsberger is going to take that next step in evolution, or Rafael Alves, although I think Alves is a little too deep in his career. This is fight 31. Maybe Rafa Garcia has something new. Maybe Michael Morales is going to more sell me than I am currently sold. So there's a lot of upside, I guess, but there's a lot of downside where all of these fights feel like they could also be just not good. I think Dober and Alves is a banger. I think Close versus Garcia will be, even the most boring form of that fight is still fairly interesting. But the rest of this could just honestly suck on the undercard. But it is paired with a pretty fire main card. So it's a bit weird. As per usual, check out below. I've got my link tree down there where it has links to basically everything. The Facebook, the various places you can find the podcast, the Discord, the Twitch channel, the YouTube, etc., etc., etc. The Twitter, etc. And links to the usual stuff is also there. Check it out. Love having you guys listening to the podcast, and I will see you after the fights, I guess, where I will finally be at home. Actually, I've been kind of curious about that. Has anyone noticed a difference in the sound quality in the two on the road podcasts I've done? Let me know. Either on Twitter, or on the Discord, or the Facebook. These are all places where you can reach me. And enjoy the fights. Like I said, it's a card where I'm doing the tilting hand motion here. It could go either way. But we'll see. Especially that undercard. The main card though actually is banger. So at least tune into that. It's probably worth the price of admission.